So, no one can claim to know the origins of any type of art form, and I think that's what makes art history so fascinating as a field of study. It's critical to the human history, but no one can ever know what the actual origins of any art form really are. And I think much has been dedicated to the research of paintings and film and music, but very little is documented about the history of comedy. And that's what I wanted to discuss today. I'm Professor Jonathan Jokes, PhD of comedy, and I guess I'm here for your first lesson in the history of stand-up comedy. So I guess there's no better place to start than the beginning, and I suppose the origins of comedy lay with whenever the first person tried to intentionally make another person laugh. And despite what my high school talent show videos would have you believe, stand-up was actually invented much, much earlier. Do you guys know, by the way, what the first joke ever was? Why did the chicken cross the road? Knock, knock, who's there? It actually begins in 1900 BC in ancient Sumeria. What's the deal with airline food? No, I'm kidding. Something which has never occurred since time immemorial. A young woman did not fart in her husband's lap. I guess you had to be there. The second oldest joke is Jerry Seinfeld's whole act that he's been doing since the 70s. Now, this ancient fart joke probably isn't the first joke ever told, but it is the earliest record we have, and I think it still kind of holds up today. I wonder if ancient Sumerians had open mic night. That might be the first joke ever told, but I'd like to focus today on specifically stand-up in particular, and if we covered all forms of history, we'd be here all day. So, what is stand-up, and how is it different from other forms of comedy? Well, if TikTok is to be believed, it's just asking everybody where they're from and what they do for a living until you trick them into getting a response, and you can curate it to look like you actually can do comedy. But anyway, let's focus on actual stand-up comedy and not tricking the algorithm into giving you a Netflix special. The origins of stand-up and your average modern open mic actually hold a lot of things in common. Racism. In the United States, stand-up actually could arguably be traced back to minstrel shows, a type of performance where white and even black performers sometimes wore blackface and acted out these racist caricatures. These proto-stand-up performances were called stump speeches, and, they were designed to kind of mock black people. They actually contained a lot of social and political satire as well, which also happens to be my excuse whenever I do blackface. If you want to find some stump speeches on YouTube, the term has actually changed to refer to whatever politicians are talking about lately. So, racist clowns spewing bullshit really hasn't changed that much over time. I was able to find this recording on Wikipedia from 1902 by the American Quartet.
My efforts am crowned with the apex of my most laudable anticipation.
Geez, tough crowd. Without the cultural and political context, a lot of the references and commentary can be lost. So unlike a movie or a song that can be enjoyed no matter how old it is, a lot of these old school comedy performances really haven't aged very well and are kind of inaccessible. Which, ironically enough, is a testament to this art form's longevity for how often it needs to be refreshed and updated. Because as long as there are politics in the world, there's going to be something to make fun of. While these speeches also had an important political message, it's also important to realize that the core comedy of a lot of these things was watching a black person or a caricature thereof mispronounce something. Now, I'm only half a person of color and not the relevant color for this point of topic, so to better understand the intricacies of racial tensions in show business, I recommend looking up someone more qualified to talk about that. But one performer at the time took on this racist format and used it to elevate himself to stardom. Burt Williams is another of the pantheon of early proto-stand-ups that helped popularize the two-man act of the one jokester and the one straight man. Born in the Bahamas and moved into the U.S. as a baby, Williams began to perform in minstrel shows as a teenager alongside George Walker. The two of them would quickly become one of the most popular comedy acts of all time. For the period, I guess. As opposed to the white performers doing blackface, Walker and Williams promoted themselves as two real... Yeah, I'm not saying that. Anyway, but it's a hell of an advertisement, and the irony of black performers doing blackface was not lost on them either, as their act featured layers and layers of ironic social commentary. The two became massive stars in America and internationally and helped cement comedy's ability to confront difficult topics. Interestingly, a lot of these performances shared a lot of the same material, and the cardinal sin of joke stealing in modern stand-up really didn't exist back then. No one was associating the material with the comedian themselves, and no one was going out on a date night to see a particular comedian. We see a lot of instances of performers appropriating material from other performers, and vaudeville performers would often reprise these short acts from well-known plays, or sang parts of operas, or danced in the styles of the time. Originality was not a priority. In my research, this is probably the biggest deviation from modern stand-up, where being a joke thief is kind of the worst thing you could possibly be. It'll derail your career.
Maybe the worst gimmick a comic ever had.
At this point, I think it's important to mention that this is a pretty uniquely American art form, and while obviously comedy is a universal constant, stand-up was only really developing in America and the UK. Even to this day, stand-up is not as popular in other countries, probably because of their lack of free speech. USA, baby! But probably the most well-known originators of stand-up wasn't even a stand-up comic as we know them today. Mark Twain was traveling around the country giving these humorous speeches on a tour he called Our Fellow Savages of the Sandwich Islands. The transcript is actually available online to this day and is still worth a read. I've left a link for it down below. And these types of monologues would usually last about 15 minutes. He actually ended up taking the show overseas to the UK, where he changed the monologue to appeal more to sophisticated British sensibilities. And obviously Mark Twain did not invent stand-up on his own, and he would probably be generally considered a humorist. Is a term I'm still not quite sure exactly what that means, but all you need to know is they smell their farts in a way that's different from a stand-up comedian. But he is one of the earliest well-known figures to popularize the framework that would grow into modern stand-up. I think we would be doing a disservice to the art form if we did not give credit to probably the true originators of stand-up as we know it today, and that would be the performers of the Chitlin Circuit. Now, the Chitlin Circuit was a network of venues and spaces that allowed black performers stage time during the Jim Crow era. It was like the lifeblood of black dancers, musicians, and, of course, comedians that would go out to become legends of their time in their respective art forms. This network of spaces would eventually give birth to a little fad called rock and roll, but that's neither here nor there either. This circuit really helped develop the careers of several influential comedians, including, my personal favorites like Red Fox, Dick Gregory, and Richard Pryor, if you've ever heard of those guys. Comics who would become the architects for modern stand-up as we know it today. It's a far departure from the punny monologues of the late 19th century. While Richard Pryor would no doubt become the greatest comedian to come out of the Chitlin Circuit and one of the greatest comedians in the world in general, before he was even sucking his thumb or Marlon Brando's thumb, look it up, there was Moms Mabley. Moms Mabley, born Loretta Mae Aiken, was born in North Carolina in 1897, and by the time she was 14, she had moved away from her family. She ran away and moved to Cleveland, Ohio, to join a minstrel show. Her family was less than thrilled, as she quickly gained popularity, and her brothers stating she was a stage woman ain't nothing but a prostitute, which resulted in her changing her name to the now iconic moniker. Despite her popularity, because she was a woman, her pay was very low during this time, and in the Chitlin Circuit, she eventually came out as a lesbian, being one of, if not the first openly gay comedians that we know of, referring to her performances quite bluntly as lesbian stand-up. She eventually rose to mainstream popularity, aka white people would come to watch her, as she played in Carnegie Hall, The Ed Sullivan Show, and the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour, which I know might sound hard to believe now, but those were big deals back in the day. Her life story is so influential and interesting to comedy's history, it's worth its own episode in general, I think, in the future. So if you want some extracurricular reading, I recommend looking her up on your own. Another comic considered to be the first in their field was Mort Saul, who is also widely credited with being the first stand-up comic, for whatever that means. As I said before, there was a lot happening all over the country all the time around this time, so no one person can be considered the first stand-up comedian. Saul, born in Montreal to Jewish parents, moved to LA to become a stand-up comedian after being kicked out of the army for refusing to follow orders. He found a little bit of success at the time and even offered to perform for free at NBC just for the exposure. He eventually auditioned at the Hungry Eye Club, or Hungry One, I'm not sure, I don't know, where the owner took an immediate liking to him. From there, his popularity exploded like wildfire. So what made him so influential? Comedians of the time had this really slick, carefully crafted act of one-liners that was successful, but it was safe. Saul was different. He went on stage laid back and cool and improvisational. He went on stage with a newspaper tucked on under his arm, which became like his signature look. He revolutionized the way a comedian could behave on camera. And in other words, he was natural. So Sal became the first of many things in comedy. He was the first to record an album, the first comedian on Time magazine, and the first comedian to win a Grammy. His political satire became the groundwork for the next generation of comedians like Carlin and Lenny Bruce, who both cite him as a major inspiration. And it seemed like Sal was on top of the comedy world, even becoming the writer for JFK's speeches and eventually his personal friend. But nothing lasts forever, and once JFK was in office, Sal began to skewer him the same way he did everybody else. Luckily, JFK laughed it off. No, I'm just kidding. He blackballed him from performing. JFK's father called the clubs he performed at and blacklisted him from many stages across the country. Yeah, if you think comedians today are having trouble with cancel culture, try having the president's dad personally shut down your gigs. He also talked openly on stage about how he believed the CIA was responsible for JFK's death, which was probably true, and but audiences or bookers really didn't like it at the time. By the time the 70s rolled around, the counterculture movement was underway, and a general distrust of the government was the norm, leading to a comeback for Saul, but never to his original heights. In 1983, the LA Times said, "Mort Saul has charted one of the most precipitous courses in American entertainment for the last 30 years and has gone from celebrity to internal exile. There was no precedent for what he did. There were no prototypes. He is genuinely self-created man and a true existential in that sense. Once he passes from the scene, people will begin to lionize him and call him a great American and take to heart all the things he said." Mort Saul continued to perform even into his 80s, every Thursday at a club in Mill Valley, California. He passed away in 2021 at the age of 94. So that's the groundwork of stand-up comedy as we know it today. It's continued to grow and evolve and just continues to change in this new era of social media and internet fame. It is fascinating for me to learn about where it all started and how the art form has come from where it began. And each of the artists I mentioned deserves a lesson in their own right, but I hope this has served as like a sort of foundational groundwork for where stand-up comedy came from. And if you want to see me do some, you can check out some videos of me doing stand-up. And if you want to read more about the history of stand-up or learn a little bit more about these guys I've mentioned here, I've left some links in the description. So if you'd like to learn more, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.
Maybe the worst gimmick a comic ever had.